views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. The mere mention of these locations sends a chill up your spine. Columbine, Aurora, Virginia Tech, Charleston, San Bernardino, and of course too many more. The list is horribly long. And while we can and should utilize any and every means to end the gun carnage, there is one cold steel reality we all must consider. And that is, if the unthinkable happens, if a thug with a gun bursts into your subway, your bus, your school, your church, your place of business, or even your own home, what should you do in that so-called active shooter circumstance that would give you and your loved ones the best chance to survive? Tonight we have a professor of criminal justice from Monroe College with us, who is a foremost expert in active crisis management, a retired commander from our city's transit system, and the CEO of his own security firm, and in total, an expert on how to make the best possible decisions in these life or death situations. You can ask questions or make comments by calling in at 718-960-7261 or send an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, a former commanding officer of NYPD Transit Bureau Operations, a professor in the Monroe College School of Criminal Justice, and the CEO and founder of ICMC Group, a firm that specializes in crisis preparation and resolution, Professor Keith Singer. Professor Singer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
I have to say to you and to our viewers, in setting up the show, I felt that this was just a horrible thing to have to do. We try to put out things that make the people of the Bronx feel good, make them positive things that make them feel better, but really not only in the Bronx, but everywhere we have to deal with this. So in that way, I apologize. On the other hand, this is obviously very, very needed. So let's just start from the perspective of a commanding officer. You're the commanding officer of transit. You've been schooled and trained and you've counseled. You get the call, however it comes through, there's somebody with a gun, even an automatic weapon in a subway. What, as a commanding officer, what do you do?
Okay, first things first is what you want to do as a commanding officer is you establish yourself as the incident commander. So now what the incident commander must do is speak with one voice, speak with continuity, be decisive, and make quick decisions. So you have to see who's going to go into that location, how many people you want in that location, what to do with the inner perimeter, what to do with the outer perimeter.
Inner perimeter meaning within, let's say, the subway station itself,
That's
or
correct.
even a series of stations. If it's on a moving subway, you never know
That's
what's
correct.
going
You
on.
want to form perimeters. You want to form an inner perimeter and you want to form an outer perimeter. Some people might call them zones. So where your active shooter might be, that would be considered a hot zone. The zone right after that would be considered a warm zone, and the zone right after that would be considered a cold zone.
In terms of the numbers that you talked about, which I guess would be your first, or among your many first considerations, how do you determine, in other words, you know, San Bernardino is most current in our memories, so maybe we could use that as an example. How would you determine how many people you would need, or in a subway or something, if, you know, there is what appears to be, let's say, a lone gunman?
Okay, so the way we deal with active shooters today is much different than the way we dealt with active shooters during Columbine. Remember, the way we dealt with active shooters during Columbine was the same way. We treated it as a hostage situation. With a hostage situation, the patrol unit would come, would isolate and contain, and then would wait for a SWAT team or an ESU team, whatever you want to call it. Now, with the new protocols of active shooter, and with we know what the active shooter is going to do, and they're going to try to cause as much destruction as possible in as little time, that patrol officer is going to be the one now that goes in. Now, the question is this, whether that patrol officer goes in 1 or 2 officers, solo, or do you wait for at least 2, 3, 4 police officers to show up? Now, you have to remember, time is of the essence in active shooter, because the more time wasted, it's going to be the more victims.
So again, let's get a scenario. So you're in a subway station, a Bronx subway station. There's a report, and he's not necessarily on the train, but he's in the station. You're going to have to deal with all the entrances and exits. Are you allowed to tell me how many officers you would send in? 5, 10, 20, 100?
Well, again, it's not me who's sending in the officers. The patrol officer now is not waiting anymore. They're not waiting. The patrol officer goes in.
Whereas a hostage situation, you'd
That's
step
correct.
back.
Hostage situation, you have time. You can step back and say, okay, let's take a deep breath.
So they're going in?
They're going in because you need to go in because time is of the essence. We know already what an active shooter wants to do. They want to create as much mayhem and carnage as possible.
So when they go in, what is he advised to do? Because you certainly don't want to put your officers in more, and certainly they're going to have to be in some danger. What are the tactical things they're thinking about, and as well as the other officers with them?
Okay, so some departments allow their officers to go in solo. Some other departments do not allow their officers to go in
NYPD
solo.
departments?
Would not allow their officers to go in solo. For as long as I know, they do not allow their officers to go in solo. Because you have to understand, although the officer goes in solo, 75% of the time that officer will make contact with the active shooter. Okay. However, in 1/3 of those instances, the officer gets shot. So what you would want to do is you'd probably want to send a team of officers, 4 to 5 officers in there as a contact team. And they will go inside that location.
Which brings that percentage down, we'd like to think.
Correct. And they would want to make contact with the active shooter. Now, what type of tactics you're using in that is that, one, you want to assess the situation. So when we're talking about quickly responding to these active shooters, there's a difference between acting quickly and stupidly. You still want to assess the situation. So where are the shots coming from? Where are the people screaming? It will give you an indication of which way to go once you're inside. Because truth be told, you might not know that location.
And so, you drew the line because I was talking from the perspective of the commanding officer, and of course you're going to get to the scene as quickly as you are, maybe
Correct.
you're downtown or somewhere else. But those patrol officers, individually, just from the way you described it, have immense decisions to make which involves their own safety and the safety certainly of every one of us.
That's correct. Immense.
And that is your, frankly, everyday NYPD patrol officer.
Yep. Everyday NYPD patrol officer will now be your tactical officer on scene for an active shooter.
If nothing else, in this conversation, folks, you got to be appreciating who our police officers are. I mean, as we start to play this out, we're going to talk about what we need to do, but you say they're going in and they're going to identify and try and confront or
Correct.
find. What would be stupid that's your word, not mine, that an officer might do or you advise him not to do?
Running right in blindly. Assess the situation. Assess it quick.
Even if it
but
takes
still
you a
assess it.
moment.
Correct. Now, when I'm saying assess the situation, I'm not saying assess it for 5 or 10 minutes. You don't want to do that. What you want to do, however, is assess it and see, okay, do I hear gunshots? Do I hear screaming? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from the right? Are they coming from the left?
Are people already down?
Are people in the vicinity out in front of the building that know the building or know the subway station that you might not know and say, hey, listen, if I go to my right, what am I looking at? Am I looking at a cafeteria? Am I looking at offices?
And in many cases, much like the way it was reported in San Bernardino, we don't always know, they say, gee, somebody's shooting, but they wouldn't know if it's coming from 1 or 2, and that may be not defined at the time.
Exactly. You have to remember with active shooters, a very fluid situation.
This has been in the news, this guy in California who had a gun, was walking down the block, and people are complaining because they did shoot him dead with many, many shots. You and I both were part of a training demonstration today. Many of the shots they take don't hit their target. In other words, people say, why did he shoot 30 times? But because they got to make sure that this person, whoever it is down.
Correct. So with the exercise that we did today, it opened a lot
At the college, by the way.
at
so
the
people
college,
might wanna
at
know.
Monroe College, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes in that room because the person that was doing the exercise, one didn't make a direct hit on the perpetrator. The shots went everywhere but hitting the perpetrator.
Right. And that person was still dead on, unfortunately,
Correctly.
committing mayhem.
Right. And if you would have asked that person afterwards who was doing that exercise how many shots they fired, and I counted them, he fired 7 shots. He would have said 3 to 4, guaranteed. Because that's how quick the situation goes.
And so that might be an answer as to why so many shots are fired, because you don't know how many you've hit, even if you're a trained...
Yeah, because the perspective of time goes completely out the window at that point.
So let's talk a little bit about, in fact, a lot of bit about the people on the subway, our friends and neighbors in the Bronx. What should you be doing? Now, any of the scenarios that I talked about at the beginning, and unfortunately, I'm not making it up. We've seen it in schools. We've seen it in places of business. We've seen it in buses and subways and churches and places. The last place you would think or even imagine that somebody would be coming in with a gun. What should, give me the steps. What should, number one, the person in that situation should be thinking or doing that could help them do better?
Okay, so are you asking during the active shooter situation or
Yes,
before?
yes. Somebody bursts in.
Okay, somebody bursts in, you're in an active shooter situation.
Right.
First step, try to avoid. Try to get out of there. Try to avoid, okay? If you could avoid, that's the best possible route to get blocks away from that active shooter. However...
Okay, so let's just do it. So if you're in a school, God forbid, all of this is God forbid, if you're in a school and somebody bursts into the classroom next to you, is that appropriate to say start running? Because a lot of people say don't get out of that room at that time.
If you could find a way to get out of there...
Get out.
Without getting hurt, get out.
Okay.
Avoid.
Okay, keep going.
Second step, contain, meaning contain yourself. If you can't avoid, if you can't get out of there...
Like if you're in the classroom.
You're in the classroom, you can't get out.
Or the subway or
Right.
the bus.
Contain yourself. Try to protect yourself.
How?
Put something up against that door. Shut the lights off. Be
I see.
quiet. Get down on the floor. In the Virginia Tech shootings, what they did after reviewing those shootings, that the first classroom that the shooter went into, they didn't use defensive tactics. And 92% of the people in that classroom were shot.
When you say defensive tactics, meaning...
Get down, shut the lights off, barricade the
Okay,
door.
so wait, this is important. So you want to get down, you want to be as low to the ground as possible. Prone or in a bundle?
No, the best, what I would suggest is spread everybody out on that floor. Because if...
And you should be flat on the floor as opposed to, curled up.
Whichever way would be better for you to hide from the person.
Right.
Up against the door so they can't see in, underneath a desk. So if they do see in,
Right.
they don't know
in the
whether
subway,
it's
under a seat, or
under a
bus.
seat. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I hate having to do this, but it's so important. I'm sorry. So you do that, and another tactic that I've heard about and read about, and you've heard it from people who've survived, even in San Bernardino, is they pretended they were dead. So that they were in the room and maybe they were wounded, but then is that a proper thing?
I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's a big misnomer. Research has been done on that with active shooters. If you pretend that you were dead, most likely the active shooter is going to do harm to you. Okay?
Really? Because they want to just...
Carnage and mayhem. So if you pretend you're dead, most likely you'll get hurt. You need to act in an active shooter situation. So again, either get out of there if you can. Contain means barricade yourself, get low down to the ground, shut off the lights. And as a last possible resort would be to the fight or flight. Sometimes you have to fight.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because and this entails a number of different aspects. Should somebody confront the shooter? I mean, you'd like to think somebody could take him down if they could get close enough. Somebody bursts in a room, somebody gets behind him. Should you do that, or does that make you more likely to get shot? Certainly, maybe you could prevent others. What's the philosophy and the theory on
Only
that?
as a last resort.
Only as the last resort.
Only as a last resort should you try to take out the active shooter.
Why is that?
Because you put yourself in a position
Because
to get
then
killed.
you've singled yourself out as an opponent.
That's correct.
Do you try to, if they come in and they're not shooting, but they're holding a weapon of some sort, do you try to talk to them?
If you're not trained to talk to a person, I wouldn't try to talk to them.
Really?
Because let's just look at it this way. An active shooter, again, is not a person taking hostages. A person taking hostages wants something. An active shooter is mad at something. So they're aggravated at something. They're in a rage when they get to that scene. So they might be mad about people not treating them right at work. They might be mad at people not treating them right in school. They might be mad about
or something they just made up.
Just anything. So you have to remember, they're mad. So you're not going to be able to talk to a person that's in that state, especially if you're not a trained person. So in that situation, if that active shooter is just there, and there's no way for you to get out, and there's no way to contain yourself, that would probably be the situation that you would want to fight.
What if it's not actually an active shooter, that it is potentially a hostage situation, that somebody bursts in and maybe they're having self-doubts? You can see it, that they were ready to shoot, but goodness, this horrible thing just confronted them. And so now they're saying, everybody in the corner, and then they bolt the door, and maybe they make a call or whatever. Do you try to talk to them? And if so, what would you say?
Hostage situation is a much, much different animal than an active shooter. In a hostage situation, they're all looking for something. They're looking to get something. Okay, so can you possibly talk to a person that is taking you hostage and speak some sense? Sure. Would I advise it just out of nowhere to try to talk to your hostage, to talk to the person that took you hostage if you're not trained? No, because you might say something that might set that person off.
That make it worse,
Correct.
and you don't even know what it is.
Correct. So you need to be trained in things of that nature.
What about a place of business? And unfortunately, this is we know about mass shootings, and we know about all these large situations. But unfortunately, in fact, there was something on TV just the other night of somebody who burst into a Bronx deli and brandished a gun, and I don't know if people got shot. I forget which incident it is. What's best to do for, let's say, a store owner in the Bronx?
Be prepared.
And what does that mean?
Be prepared. Make sure you have something around you that you could protect yourself with if need be. Okay, a pair of scissors might protect you from an active shooter. Mm-hmm. Okay, a stapler might help you in an active shooter.
In what way? Like a guy comes in with a gun. I mean, a pair of scissors.
I mean, throwing an object at somebody can give you possibly the time to get out of there. Because once you
push something over, or
anything, so it could that might be the time that is necessary for you to get out of there.
Mm-hmm. Can you illustrate some situations that you've seen or heard about where somebody made the wrong choices? You already talked about Virginia Tech. That's possibly because these kinds of dialogues were not very common at those early stages when we were still learning about mass shootings.
Correct.
But other scenarios where somebody might have made a wrong determination that didn't help them?
Yeah. That would have to be the Columbine shooting. And once again, it's not that they made the wrong decision, because that was the decision that they were trained to make at the time by waiting, because they waited over...
Oh, you're saying the officers who responded.
Correct. They waited over 30 minutes to go into the high school. However, you can't put that on the officers because that's the way they were trained. Mm-hmm. So was that a mistake? Yes, because in this new breed of active shooter, they didn't know that the main purpose for the shooter was to kill as many or injure as many people as possible.
It hadn't reached our common consciousness.
It had not surfaced yet at all. So yes, that would be a mistake that comes to mind. But again, it wasn't a mistake because that's the way they were.
And what
trained.
about people who are victims or potential victims? Errors, they say, gee, why did he, I don't know, rush the shooter or any number of things?
You could always second guess yourself during the situation, and to be quite honest, nobody knows how they're going to react to an active shooter situation until they're actually in that situation. I could say I'm going to do this, and I could say I'm going to do that, but all of a sudden an active shooter comes bursting in, I might just freeze. The best thing that a person can do is go over in their head, what would I do? I would do A, B,
Preparation.
C, D. Preparation.
There's a very large and loud dialogue in America right now about people owning personal handguns and thinking that, well, if we own personal handguns in these situations, that could be of some use. And you hear people all the time, if only I had been in that, in that health center when the San Bernardino shooters came in, I have a gun, I could have dealt with that. Tell me, evaluate that philosophy for me.
Okay, studies have shown that active shooters do tend to go to a location that's not very well protected. So an active shooter would go on a college campus because they know it's a gun-free zone. For instance, the San Bernardino, I believe that was the only building that wasn't secure as the other buildings were, and I think they knew it, and I think they went in and they took advantage of it. Sure. So active shooters do look for the most vulnerable locations to go to.
But if somebody bursts in, what is the likelihood? And I mean, listen, we've had these mass shootings in states where guns are prevalent. You see them in Texas. You see, they're all over the place. What is the possibility that if you have a gun, you're going to be able to deal with it and take somebody out and prevent carnage in that kind of moment?
Again, that would be on a situational basis. I don't know if I have a good shot at that time if I have a firearm. I might have a great shot if I have a firearm at that time. I really couldn't answer that because the situation dictates whether or not you having a gun is going to work in that particular situation.
I guess what I'm trying to push for is some kind of conclusion on what this dialogue is, whether it's better, because the philosophy is to arm everybody, because if you arm everybody, then these guys won't shoot. Somehow I feel like that's only going to make people more likely to have problems in their home, or you'll have people shooting all over the place, and maybe untrained people using their weapons in situations where maybe it would be better if they didn't.
Right. Again, I don't know what the social aspects would be for people carrying firearms. However, again, with the active shooters, they tend to go towards the most vulnerable locations. So I think if an active shooter knew that there was armed security, if there was possibly armed professors or anybody armed in that particular location,
you would lean in that direction.
I think they would go. I think they would go for another location.
Very interesting. I asked you about scenarios where people made wrong choices. Or give me some idea of people who made good choices. And I'm not talking about the tacticians and the police involved. I'm talking about the general public.
I think the San Bernardino case in point. I think a lot of great decisions were made during that active shooter situation, such as the San Bernardino Police Department got information out in a timely fashion. I saw the victims walking out of those buildings, and they had their hands up, and that's one of the things that...
Why? Because you want to make sure that everybody who's doing that is clean.
Well,
right?
Because active shooters will sometimes mingle with the people who are coming out to pretend that they're a victim to either try to escape or cause more carnage. So you saw those people walking out of that building with their hands up.
You did.
And I believe that the organization 2 weeks prior had active shooter drills. So it showed that they were drilling because they did everything that they were supposed to do.
List a couple of things, which you started with. Let's be very specific, and I want to be as helpful to our friends and neighbors in the Bronx as we can. So if you're not in that room, if it happens in your place of business and you become aware of it, barricade the door with desks or sofas or anything you think that would be as solid as possible.
Yes.
Okay, what else?
Also, when you do come out, make sure your hands are up, like the people of San Bernardino, because the police, they don't know yet who the active shooter is, and they don't know whether or not the active shooter is going to try to mingle in with victims. So helping the police out as much as possible, listening to their demands, whatever they're telling you to do, is of prime importance.
At what point do you get out of the room? Because you could be in that room and have the perpetrator standing right outside the door and saying, okay, police, come out, everything is safe. At what point do you know that you should be able to open the door? And of course, one of the other pieces of advice that I'm well aware of, you don't open the door and look it down the hall, because then, of course, if the situation is still going on.
Well, what do we all have on us, Gary, that everybody's looking at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Cell phone. You can always update yourself through your cell phone. Or You can update other people through your cell phone using Twitter. You could say active shooter, just near door, room something, 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 and put it out there. So
that I'm in room so
right,
and so.
So the organization, the police know now where the active shooter actually is. So that would be part of training as well.
For somebody who wants to learn more and prepare themselves, their home, their business, is there somewhere online that you think is good where they can get good information or get good advice to learn how to do it? I mean, every business I would recommend does their own training. But tell me about that.
Absolutely. You could Google preparation for active shooter, and a whole list of stuff will come out of what you could do and what you shouldn't do in situations of an active shooter. So again, the information's out there at anybody's fingertips. It's just now getting everybody, aware of, say, hey, listen, this is a problem now. This is the way we live now, so we have to train for it.
Not only train for it, but I guess preparation is a very big key. And we talked about preparation if the lights go out, so people keep cans of tuna fish and they make sure to have extra batteries, for their flashlights and everything else. I guess, unfortunately, as I opened the show with tragically, you now need preparation for this. Every business, every family should be aware of it.
Everybody should be prepared for an active shooter situation because it is, like you said, unfortunately, the world that we live in.
And I guess the bottom line on that is one way to at least help keep yourself safe is just like they did in San Bernardino, at least have some idea about doing it. Now, I just wanted to put information to contact Professor Singer. He has his own security firm, and so we can put that information up. Just tell us real quickly about it, because it's a new firm. Tell us what it is.
Okay, it's a new firm. It's a crisis management firm. It's called Imprimis Crisis Consulting Group. And what we do is we help personal, business, and or political people with their crises. So if you're a person that's going through a personal crisis, I'd be able to help you, give you a plan, and be able to move on.
So if you have a business, whether it be a deli or something like that, and you say, gee, I saw you on TV and I want to do the right thing, that's what you'd be...
Absolutely. I'd be able to get you a crisis resolution plan because, again, a crisis is just like an active shooter. It's something
really
that
important.
It's something that just pops up.
And I must say, and I know you work at Monroe College, the more young people you educate, the better we all are. Professor Keith Singer from Monroe College, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me.
Appreciate it, and I'm sorry we had to do this. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like Bronx Talk on Facebook, and you can check out the archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Thanks to producer Dalia Gonzalez. Our director is Neilani Rodriguez. Helen on the prompter, the cast of thousands. And guess what? We'll see you next week. Good night.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. You can't control where it will land, only what happens before it does. Visit fireadapted.org to learn how to protect your community from wildfires.
So, I got this new family, and I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy. Oh, and she even talks to it.